Okay, so my talk here is about what do you mean when you say leadership? This is, actually this sounds kind of loud. Is this okay in terms of volume for everyone? Okay, cool. It's just kind of weird for me. Okay, so anytime someone says something about leadership, this is the first question I have, because I think leadership is an easy word to throw out there, but it's also an easy one to misunderstand. To start, I'm going to summarize the entire talk just in case you have something better to do, and I'll just get it over in a couple slides. Okay, so when people say leadership, I would say they are typically oversimplifying a multifaceted set of problems we are dealing with in product delivery. And something like this is a little bit closer to what we're dealing with. It's still just a model, so it's not perfect, but it's closer than just a single word. Okay, that's the talk. If you have another one you want to go to, that's pretty much all I'm going to talk about. So feel free. That's the end of that. Okay, so the problem I see here is when we hear someone say leadership, it's fairly unlikely that we're talking about the same thing, right? It's unlikely we mean the same thing, which means we're kind of have confused communication. And this is a problem because it's very hard to have a meaningful discussion about something if we don't actually mean the same thing when we're talking about it. We just kind of talk past each other and you get these kind of weird discussions. So if we don't even mean the same thing when we say leadership, it's quite difficult to then presume that we're going to have become more effective at it, right? It kind of doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to suggest that we want to be more thoughtful when we talk about this. By that, as I mentioned before, the idea that leadership is a very multifaceted concept, and we want to look at all those facets. The reason why I say leadership is multifaceted, or the reason why it is multifaceted, is because we are trying to address more than one type of problem. How many people read this book? Just curious. Art of Action, Stephen Bungay. Nobody? Really? Okay, I'm going to suggest you read this book. It's very good. And kind of, it explains some of my thinking here, but specifically, the idea that if we have groups of people trying to achieve collective outcomes, we're going to encounter three basic problems that always occur. The first problem being that with this group of people, we need to determine what we consider the correct thing to do, the right things to do, right? And it could be multiple things, but you have to kind of work out what is the right thing to do. Problem number two, we need to agree that that thing we decided to do, like we're actually on the same page. If we don't agree, then we're like going in different directions, okay? I also put a little thing. I really mean accept, I don't actually mean agree. So in a large group of people, you could say, I accept that's the direction we're going to take even if you don't agree. Like that's all you really need, okay? Problem number three is that you need to coordinate to do the thing that you agreed to do. So that makes sense. The better you are at addressing those problems, the more successful you are likely to be. That is the basic idea behind sort of the art of action. Okay, conversely, just so to reinforce the point, there are multiple paths to failure when we're trying to get groups of people to achieve an agreed outcome, a collective outcome. First one, I could have the right direction, as in we worked out the correct thing to do, we all aligned on it, and we can't coordinate to do it, which means we can't deliver, right? We just have like a mess of people trying to struggle to achieve something, but we're just like running all over the place, even though we agreed that was the correct thing to do, and it was the right thing to do. The second type of failure is we've picked the right thing to do, we're really good at organizing ourselves, but we can't come to an agreement on the right thing to do. So this is kind of a weird thing to think about. Like by this I mean somebody came up with the right thing to do, but we don't agree on it. So you have conflict. People are working on things, and the things that they're working on, they're organized around it, but you have multiple misaligned efforts, and you can't deliver. The third failure is we all agree that we're going to do this thing, and we're very coordinated, and we misread the situation and we're doing the wrong thing, and it will not work no matter how how much in alignment, how much coordination, how effective we are as a delivery team, we built the wrong thing, we're doing the wrong thing. It's not ever going to work. Okay? So you can deliver, it's the wrong thing, you can't achieve the desired outcome. Right? 3 different ways to fail. Now, obviously, there are also different combinations. You could fail at everything, like so just the most horrible team. You can't do anything correctly. You can do 2 out of 3 you're wrong, so on and so forth. But basically, these are like the easiest types of errors. Okay, so there's 3 concepts here that come out of this. One is the importance of direction. In Bungay's book, he talks about command, but I'm not going to use that word because there are too many other connotations to command, which are not useful. But to say direction as in the act of determining the correct thing to do. Leadership, which means influencing people to align with a direction. Depending on how you think of it, you could think of it as getting people to follow, but I'm not going to say that because like the fact that it's someone following is just one way of influencing people to align to a direction. That's not the only way. And management being the coordination of people and resources to do whatever you decide to do. Okay, and that's 3 facets. Again, reinforcing the point, direction doesn't mean necessarily that I have a director. Leadership doesn't mean I necessarily have a leader. Management doesn't necessarily mean I have a manager. We're talking more about the activity that needs to occur because it's solving a particular problem. We're not talking about any particular position because there's more than one way to solve it. It's just this is saying what are the different types of things that need to occur because we're dealing with problems that always happen. Okay, and back to this what is this, 4x3? If we get more specific to product delivery, I'm going to argue there are facets upon those facets. So I'm looking at direction, leadership, and management, but not just in general. I'm looking at from a product perspective, from a design perspective, from a technology perspective, and from a people perspective. I've used these categories because this is essentially the structure that Spotify uses. We could argue whether there are different categories, and I actually would probably argue in different industries and different companies you might use different categories, but this at least demonstrates the idea that I want to convey. Okay, so I'm going to stick with this, and it roughly works for most places. Okay, so I'm going to talk through more detail what each thing means, just to again clarify the point. So when we say product direction, I'm talking about the discovery and determination of product strategies and roadmaps that will work. So if we say direction is determining the correct thing to do, product direction is determining the right product thing to do. And that's when you say, okay, what's my product strategy? What's my product roadmap? Failure in this would be like saying, I'm going to build a product that nobody wants to buy. I don't know. I'm going to make a funny joke. Google Glass, there's a nice one. That's just bad call, right? Okay, that's a product direction problem. Okay? The type of activities here, I just throw up some examples because they're not, they vary a lot. But as an example, a few things that you might think would fall underneath this, if I'm doing stuff like business model canvas or value proposition canvas or any kind of product, whatever type thing, those are all, what is the correct strategy to take for something? It's not getting people to agree with it. It's just like, how do we work out intellectually, conceptually, what is the correct thing to do? Product leadership, as contrast, covers the communication and inspiring of others to connect with the product strategy. So the distinction here is product leadership in this model here, I'm not talking about determining the right product to build. I'm talking more about the convincing of people that decision, that strategy, that roadmap is correct, such that they will line up to support it. Okay? Again, this is distinct from like choosing the right product strategy. So you could be very effective at product leadership for a product that is idiotic, that will never sell, right? And like the independent idea. As an example, when we look at stuff like when we think about big name product designers, like even like Steve Jobs and some of his stuff, a lot of it where he's trying to get people to connect with this vision of what that product is, independent of whether it's correct. And sometimes if you look at some of the past stuff, some of them were horribly wrong. But he's able to convince people that it's the correct thing. And this whole storytelling, that's product leadership. Again, distinct from product direction. And as being an Agile conference, one of the tactics we typically use to do product leadership is to get more people involved in the determination of product strategy, which means they connect with it simply because they were part of it. Like what I'm saying is that aspect of getting involved, part of it might be because we produce better product ideas, if you will, but a lot of it is actually because it's more of a product leadership activity to get people to connect with product strategy, okay? And like both of those things are happening. And finally, like product management then is when I'm saying, okay, now I'm just coordinating people and resources. So I need to get people here, I need to get particular machines here, whatever. I have to do all the kind of stuff that are necessary to facilitate product delivery. If you are, like I would say this is roughly equivalent to what people might typically call project management. It's just getting stuff together. You don't necessarily know whether the thing you're trying to get together to deliver works at all. It could be wrong. And you might not even include saying convincing people that it's the correct thing to do. You're just trying to like juggle schedules and stuff like that. Okay, and I'm making that distinction. The reason why I don't like using project management for this is, like partly from my context, is that we don't really do that many projects. It's like an ongoing thing, so it's just clearer what is happening here. Okay, I just made this point. I also like saying delivery management because then we're not really making any statement about whether or not it's a project or it's an ongoing thing. Okay, so what are product management activities? I think like when we have stand-ups, planning, Kanban boards, lots of meetings, those are all product management activities. One of the problems, of course, of using the phrase product management is people typically lump all of the previous things into product management. They're looking at direction, leadership, and the management all in one bucket. It's problematic. Just specifically, even just where I'm working now at Spotify, we've had some issues where because it's all lumped together, you don't notice that you have a gap because you say, oh no, I'm doing direction leadership stuff, I have a gap in management, but given that I lumped everything in there, I don't have a distinct idea that there's something missing. So that's partly why, again, why I'm even talking about this stuff. Okay, now I'm going to talk about a distinction between, at least in the kind of tech companies, you typically distinguish product versus design, mainly because they're trying to distinguish business outcome type concerns versus customer experience type concerns. Depending on your industry, you may not do this, but it's very typical for these kind of consumer-oriented tech companies. And also, there are feedback loops. So the idea, like, you can't really say a business outcome is independent of a customer experience, but for the most part, I'm just going to do this just because there are some different things to highlight. Okay, so if we look at design direction, this is where I start repeating myself. So it all ends up being discovery and determination, but instead of saying a product strategy, I'm looking at a target customer experience. So independent of even business concerns, what do I want the experience of the product to be? And working out what the correct version of that is, which is kind of a hard thing to say. What is the correct version of that? Because it does have to loop back to other things, but again, working out what that is. Typical type activities, an example, like what would that mean? Something like a design, actually, how many people have heard of a design sprint? Oh, excellent, cool, that's good. I'm not sure, when I say sprint, do you know that I'm not talking about Scrum? Okay, excellent, good. I see nodding heads, excellent. So these kind of rapid collaborative design session type things, or these kind of on-site collaborative design. If you look closely, I'm in that picture there. I'm sitting in a grocery store. So these things where you're saying, I'm going to embed myself or do particular activities to work out what is the correct target customer experience to do. Again, we're not convincing people necessarily here. We're just working out what the correct thing is. When we talk about now, oh, okay, I've worked out the correct thing to do. I'm, again, communicating and inspiring others to connect with that target customer experience. Again, I'm talking about leadership now, and in this case, design leadership. Again, I just repeat the same thing. It ends up still being storytelling and getting people involved. We talk about design management. Typically not done very often, actually. There's always seems like an industry-wide gap on this. So coordinating people and resources to engage in design and user experience type activities, which especially if we're doing these kind of sessions and stuff, you actually have to coordinate a number of things, and that's fine. But you can deal with it in the same way. You just use stand-ups, planning, Kanban boards, lots of meetings. Every time I say management, I'm just going to say lots of meetings. Okay. Now let's look at technology. So technology direction, again, same pattern. Discovery, determination. In this case, it's technical strategy and roadmap. The type of activities you have associated with this end up being technical strategies and roadmaps. I don't really, this is not really showing how to do it because I haven't really seen a lot of patterns here. People just sort of get together and talk about stuff, and I don't even know how to show that, to work out technical strategy. Some of it is how do I determine the correct technical direction? Usually ends up being you've played this game a long time. You've seen a lot of stuff, and then you end up working out what the correct thing to do. It's a little bit harder to describe, but the intention of it is, again, do we make the right technology decision in order that best reflects the correct thing to do given the context that we're working in? And that's direction. Technology leadership, again, is communicating and inspiring people. In this case, mainly developers to connect with the technical strategy. And I want to emphasize that this is actually something I've seen. You can have people who will connect with the product strategy, doesn't mean they'll connect with the technical strategy. Those are distinct things. I could believe that, that product approach, the design direction, the product direction are correct. I believe in it. And the way we're doing, though, I don't believe in that, which means that now I have a technology leadership gap or a technology direction gap if the reason why I don't believe in it is because it's wrong. But there's also maybe because I wasn't convinced or involved or whatever. Okay, again, storytelling and involvement tends to deal with this. So why do we encourage people to do technical design sessions together? Partly because we believe that that produces a better technical direction, but also because even if I'm not contributing that much to that discussion, that's part of technology leadership, to convince you that this is the correct thing to do. Okay, and then technology management. Coordination of people and resources to engage in various technical design activities. Typically, we may not see this different from project management because I think a lot of project managers sometimes get involved with this. But if you just had something where you had engineering management, technical management, and they're just helping coordinate that, then this is what that encompasses. I want to kind of reinforce as well, I have these different categories to highlight different needs. In practice, when you actually see this play out, it doesn't mean that they're separated, as they might be grouped together. The idea of this is just to highlight that you should see whether you're actually covering it with anything. Okay, which is why this ends up being the same. They all look the same for management. Okay, finally, even if we have all that, we also have people, right? So we have what is people direction. This is looking at an individual's career aspirations and growth. So within product delivery, the way I tend to frame it is we're not just producing a product, we're producing people who are capable of producing products. Right? And the people part is about that. So we're also looking at these different leadership aspects associated with that, not just the product. So if I'm looking at people direction, what is the individual trying to become? And how do we, and this is kind of, correctness again is kind of a weird thing to say, but again, there is something where it lines this is where the person wants or needs to be, and helping them work through that or them working that out, that activity has to occur. Leadership for people then looks at inspiring and sustaining the motivation for individuals to grow. So assuming they've worked out, okay, this is who I want to be, this is what I want to be capable of, how do we support and sustain that drive to move toward there? So like that. There's a few things here. These are probably not as well known. Has anyone heard of job crafting? Yeah, I used to do a presentation where all I did was try to stump the audience with stuff they hadn't heard of. I like that. I should do that again. So job crafting effectively means how do I design, without changing your job, how do I redesign a job to better reflect my motivations, my passions, my strengths, etc. So it's an evolutionary redesigning of jobs. So not like a big shift, it's just molding of jobs. It's a particular technique comes from University of Michigan, I think, positive organizational scholarship. Okay, it's kind of a neat thing. Again, this is a way to both work out, okay, where should I move myself if I'm doing it for myself, or how do I help someone work out what their people direction is. I've kind of combined people direction and leadership activity because I've actually found it difficult to separate the two at all, like in terms of what people end up doing. Because it is a people thing, when you say, I'm going to establish direction, usually the person who you're establishing the direction is there with you. It's kind of hard to say, oh, I've worked out what Michael's future career needs to be, but I worked that out without him there. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. I can't really imagine how I would do that, so I tend not to separate those activities, even though there are two distinct things happening here, like working out what the correct thing to do and maintaining motivation. The other thing, which is somewhat mundane, and I assume many people already do this, like the whole one-on-one thing that tends to happen with so-called people managers, that is part of the reason why you do that, is to work on, okay, where should they be heading? How do we maintain motivation, all that kind of stuff, okay? And then finally, people management then is like we're talking about all the administrative stuff. That means like approving vacations and expenses and helping people navigate organizational policy. Those are people management things. Again, like normally when you hear people management, they're grouping everything together there, which it becomes a problem because again, you miss stuff. You go, oh, I'm a people manager because I do all this administrative stuff, but I'm not addressing people direction. I'm not addressing people leadership, and that does happen. And the reason why I'm trying to make these distinctions is so that you can say, oh, that's a gap. It's actually a problem. Okay, anyone have any questions so far? Cool. Okay, I just have a pile of receipts here and a sort of a policy thing. Yes, Michael.
If you go back to people management, like I noticed you had a Dilbert cartoon. None of the other ones had Dilbert cartoons. So like, can you comment on that, or
no?
is it more like
it was a funny thing. Management experts say bosses should have frequent one-on-one meetings with underlings. Apparently, you need regular doses of my controlling gaze to prevent you from evolving into a lazy, thieving, toxic saboteur. It's working great. So far, I feel less lazy about doing the other things you mentioned. I just thought it was amusing. But I don't have a particular problem with one-on-ones per se. I'll show you some specific concrete examples because I want to highlight that different companies, different organizations execute on this matrix differently, and it's a somewhat deliberate choice. I shouldn't, it's probably not deliberate actually. Mostly accidental, but interesting to look at choice. I'm actually very skeptical that it's deliberate. It's more likely it's a reflection of where they come from. Okay, now, so like even in my past, when I started developing my career, I did not do a lot of one-on-ones. That's sort of not my thing. Now, that creates a particular type of person you see before you. But that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just like this produces this thing, and your organization structured this way, and you could do it differently. So I'll cover the next stuff, and then maybe that kind of highlights it. So, and then I do want to actually kind of invite more discussion here, because I'm only going to talk about things that I'm more specifically aware of, where I know a lot of the details, but I want to understand, even I think it would be useful to share the places you work at, like how these things look out, or shape out. So I used to work for ThoughtWorks for quite a while. They do custom application development. I know there's someone here that works for ThoughtWorks. I overheard you. Was there everyone else know who ThoughtWorks is? One hand, couple, few. They need work on branding. So they do custom application development and consulting, very big in the agile space. And that's something to remember, because that context creates a particular dynamic, which means I'm going to fulfill these needs in a particular way, whether good or bad. It's just like that's how it plays out. So if you look at, and I kind of had this center here of this delivery teams. So in this case, I'm looking at a custom application delivery where they are at a client site and they're delivering something. Now, in that scenario, again, all these parts of that matrix need to be addressed. Otherwise, there's an open problem. But how they're addressed is different. In this case, typically, it's not always the same, but typically, some of it's simplified just so I can talk about it, otherwise it gets complicated. If we talk about product and direction and leadership, when I'm doing custom application developed for a client, a lot of that does come from the client. They say, this is what I believe the product should be, and I'm going to convince you by paying you that you're going to build it that way. Okay? Like that's what custom app contracted development looks like. Now, that does not guarantee the client knows what they're doing, right? This is why they could fail at product direction even though they take responsibility for product direction. And the complicated dynamic is then you go, as a contracted consulting firm, how do you start stepping into that? Because you could see that it's wrong, right? But okay, but that's the dynamic. From a design, whoops. I should turn on cappuccino, but anyway. Waiting. So I'll just keep talking. From a design perspective, and this is, a lot of clients, they don't distinguish this, but at least from my experience, typically a lot of clients had no design consideration. They didn't spend a lot of time thinking about target customer experience, so that ended up being a ThoughtWorks design person who would fill in for design, direction, leadership, management. But yeah, maybe you might have a local person that does that, and it depends. Okay, important thing, of course, is someone has to, or some mechanism has to be in place to cover it. From a product management perspective, typically with a lot of the ThoughtWorks engagement, that was a ThoughtWorks person would act like there was something called an iteration manager and a project manager. They had like different responsibilities, but generally they're covering all the coordination of people and resources, whatever you needed to deliver the stuff. And then from a tech design leadership management, again, probably someone on the ThoughtWorks side who was like a technical lead, but almost always you're doing some kind of interaction with a local client architect of some sort, and they would cover those things. What I mentioned before of how did we get commitment, partly it was kind of involvement, and partly like practically there was a lot of cajoling by the iteration product managers. Like they would just kind of convince people to do things in a particular way. What's interesting, which I'm going to contrast with what my experience has been at Spotify, if you look at people, direction, leadership, management, actually you might update it, but for me, we had this idea of a sponsor. So you had a sponsor and they would help you out. Practically, this is mostly up to you. Okay, and this is very typical for consulting firms. It's very difficult to maintain, because you're all over the place, so it's very difficult to maintain the interaction necessary, which means you're mostly on your own. Now, again, I'm not saying it's good or bad, because it tends to produce people who are very self-sufficient and able to deal with almost any problem you throw at them, because they're used to, hey, work it out on your own. However, it's a different dynamic. Whether you want to do that or not, that depends on your situation. Okay? Any questions? Does that make sense? So I'm just trying to walk through, okay, how I'm using that matrix to think through what's happening here. And also I can start thinking, oh, is there any gaps here? Like, are we not covering particular aspects? Okay. Right, so here's my kind of summary. So I kind of bolded the stuff that ThoughtWorks tends to be in my, again, simplified, tends to be good at. The kind of design and technology stuff, all the way up and down tend to be quite strong. The management aspect, except for, I'd argue, people management, tends to be strong. But because you're doing work for clients and because this kind of expectation of self-sufficiency, certain things are weaker, right? So expectation of self-sufficiency tends to mean that the amount of activity, if you will, happening on the people side of things tend to be not as common. Like whether you say that's not common or just like the person is doing that for themselves, like we can talk about that. And because it's like client controlled, you don't see as much product direction leadership activity. There is actually ThoughtWorks studios, I think, still. They do product stuff, but I'm just talking about general custom app dev. Okay? right? So that's the strength is this kind of weird thing. Now, so any questions on that? Otherwise, I'll talk about Spotify. Okay, so the difference here with Spotify, being a kind of a product company, you build stuff for yourself. When we look at product direction leadership, we have product owners. I would not say they are equivalent to what Scrum calls product owners, but close enough. Close enough. And probably more interesting is just to say when we're talking about product direction and leadership, as in what is the correct product strategy, product roadmap to take, convincing people that it is the correct thing, that's their responsibility. It's very clear that's the case. There's a lot of interaction with the team, what we call squads, but nominally we're saying the product owner takes that. Okay. Now, just the way we work, there is a lot of interaction, so it's just more to simplify it, though I'm just going to put that boundary there. From a technical direction and leadership perspective, that's up to the team. So the squad takes care of that. From a design direction leadership management perspective, we have designers. So there's an explicit design kind of path with designers there. We have these kind of circles because everything's a lot more interactive than that, but nominally that's where the responsibility lies. Okay, when we talk about product and tech management, for the longest while, this was a little loose. So in terms of coordination of people and resources, it's kind of just sort of in the air. We kind of said that, oh, that's a product owner thing. Then practically, you notice that there's not enough time in the day to both work out what you need to build, convince people that it's the right thing to do, and also help coordinate all the stuff. It just started getting dropped. So just kind of drifted back and forth between product owners and teams themselves and whatever. So we've recently introduced a role called a tech owner to explicitly cover product tech management. Yes, explicitly that. I do not know how effective that will be because that was like a few months ago. So we'll see how it goes. Yes?
Isn't that almost like a Scrum Master? Because things you had for management was all about the visual management.
Sure. But we never had Scrum Masters. Well, we had Scrum Masters before, but not for long. So yeah, so you could say. Oh, sorry, the repeat of the question is that equivalent to a Scrum Master? Sort of. Sort of is what I would say. And like if you've read some of this stuff, I think Stockholm used to have Scrum Masters. We kind of moved away from that. Things have gotten complicated again, so things are adjusting yet again. This is, when we have tech owners here, this is not a It's not a position though. It's like a role. So someone signs up for it, and it does change for delivery. Yes, question.
Does this tech owner work with multiple teams?
The question was whether the tech owner works with multiple teams, and the answer is no. They would not. How would I describe this? For the most part, I would say they're associated with a delivery. Okay, so if a team has multiple deliveries, now most of the time when a team has multiple deliveries, they're actually too large and need to be two teams, but we haven't done that yet. Like if you just think about, but if you just thought, oh, they're associated with a delivery, that's the most accurate, in my opinion, way of describing it. So, and if you think about like what we're talking about here is management as in coordination of people's resources to achieve a collective outcome, which means I'm associating with a particular collective outcome, which is a delivery. The only thing, so your question was, does the tech owner work with the technical leadership team in order to work out what to do?
Like design and all that.
Design and all, like in terms of design, in terms of coordination management, et cetera. So first thing I want to correct is this here is not a technical leadership team, that's the team. That's the delivery team. We're saying the delivery team, in our term squad, they're responsible for technical design and leadership. So there's no separate thing, they cover that. Now, like practically, it'll end up being the people who have kind of more experienced, more skilled, whatever, they'll kind of drive that, if you will. But yes, they are working. For the most part, we're just having the tech owner just to help with coordination. making, like what we've noticed is there are enough moving parts now, it's getting complicated enough that people will drop things not intentionally, it's just they'll just lose it because there's a few too many things being juggled. And we're trying to use this to deal with that problem and see how it plays out. Other question?
This project tech manager is part of the team and they do part-time or they're full-time?
Question was, is the tech owner full-time or part-time? Again, it's not a full-time position. It is a role. Someone takes it. So as an example, just to clarify this, let's say I had a squad and we have a particular mission. And for the next 6 weeks or so, we're saying we're going to focus on this particular mission. And it's kind of a integrated, makes sense. It's a particular outcome I'm looking to deliver. Okay, we might have a tech owner assigned to that. And then that delivery ends. And they're helping to coordinate delivering of that. That thing delivers. And it shifts to, it doesn't end, it more shifts to like a maintenance type activity, but which the team is still handling. But let's say it shifts. So I no longer need that level of coordination for that particular outcome anymore. Okay, then I have a new thing that we're going to do. I don't necessarily maintain the same tech owner. I could have someone else do it. And we've even had this discussion. Like I could say, this particular outcome, this particular delivery is highly technical, which means I'll have someone who's highly technical as a technical owner because that's just easier for them to coordinate. Or I could have something that is very intensive stakeholder coordination, and I might have someone else take that one just because they just know more people, they know who to contact, all that stuff, and they'll just be better at it. So does that make sense to you? It's more dynamic than that. Now, what I've just described is probably a little controversial. Again, we're just playing around with this right now. I will come back in a few months and we'll tell you what happened. But generally, this is what I would argue. Yes, question at the back.
So how do you contain that, like by a release, like in a feature set, or like how do you know that work is done to kind of switch out the roles?
So the question was, how do you contain it in order to determine when to switch out the roles? Our delivery, like sort of pushes, if you will. I don't know what we call that. Let's call it a delivery or a release or something. They tend to be something like 6 weeks. I'm not talking about a deployment because those are happening all the time. I'm not even talking about a release as in someone sees it. I mean, I'm going to try to do something. It will usually be a 6 week approximate boundary. But it'll be something like, it's not like it won't be a technical delivery. It'll be like I have a product thing that I'm going to try to attempt to do, and then we're going to try to do it. It won't be like deliver full outcome. It'll be like I want to learn something or I want to move a particular step towards some larger thing. I don't know if that answers the question. Okay. So the final thing here is in terms of people, direction, and leadership. We have these people called chapter leads, and that's how that is done. So the chapter lead engages with each person to work out where do they want to, like really their primary responsibility is to help people work out their direction, help keep motivated, that sort of thing. Right? They're aware of delivery stuff and they help out because they're there, but that's not the primary accountability. Okay. In terms of people management, they also cover all the mundane stuff. So if you need to ask for an approval of an expense or something, they'll click the box in whatever tool they're using. Yes, question?
So again, so your chapter leads are not necessarily in the
Yes, so explicitly the chapter leads are not associated with any, So the question, actually I could just answer this question because it sort of raises the question. So explicitly the chapter leads are not associated with any one squad, which means they're not associated with any one delivery. They're associated with a group of people that have a similar function capability, and their responsibility, their accountability is to make sure those people develop, that they establish direction, that they maintain motivation, they're led, if you will. Like, I don't want to say they're led as in the chapter lead's not leading them, it's that leadership activity as in the continued sustainment of moving toward a direction is occurring, and that they are their manager in the sense that they're doing all this management activity. Yes? Is the chapter lead responsible for the performance review? Yes. I don't like performance reviews, but that's a much longer discussion, which again, it's outside of this, so, but different topic. So we can talk about that later. Yes? A typical skill set for a technology owner, really like again, and again, some of this is a little controversial, but like generally I go, the gap that we've seen in the area that I've been in has been in the coordination side, so we emphasize that most to say someone who is good at effectively what ends up being like project management type stuff. And it's the messy, just dealing with all that stuff, management, not like formal stuff which we don't really need to care about. They tend to be, just because of the way that our company is set up, you'll tend to have people with technology backgrounds because we don't really have project managers per se, except for much larger scale things. So you'll have that, but really the expectation is, oh, like if you go, oh, you're not going to be like, oh, you're like an architect. Not really, like you're not necessarily, because we'll work that out. At most you might remind people, hey, maybe we should do some design session. That's about it. But in terms of, hey, in order to deliver this thing for the holidays, what are like all the things, and like is someone paying attention to all that? Because there's quite a number of things that we haven't quite automated yet, and just to track all that, like that's more the kind of activity that occurs. Well, it's kind of funny because that meant, like we said, hey, we have this role, who wants to sign up for it? And a few people were saying, hey, that sounds cool. Technical owner sounds like a cool thing, and then they go, what? I have to do all that? Screw that, I'm out of here. I don't want to do that stuff. But you know, like that's fine. Like we go, we don't require people to do things they don't want to do. Someone else will say, hey, I want to try that out. So it's all fine. It's all good. I think someone else raised their hand there. Ideally, somewhere around 5. The question was, how many people should be in a chapter? Ideally, around 5. Practically, we are seeing some grow up to be about 20, which is way too large because they really can't spend enough time. So if you say the purpose of this relationship is to help someone establish direction and leadership, you go, how much time would that require to do that effectively? And you go 20 to 1, you will never have enough time. Not to do it well. Unless you play, I'm not sort of taking a shot at ThoughtWorks, but if you're very self-sufficient, like again, even within Spotify, for the most part, I'm very self-sufficient. My role is very self-sufficient. Sometimes I think, hey, all you pansies, get on with it. But that's not normal. That's not really, it's not normal. Yeah, but I can deal with a lot. Yes.
I know I'm hammering this. I'm curious also with the chapter lead. I get the part. I'm assuming compensation decisions are being made by these people.
Yes, to some compensation is always a more So the question was, how is compensation determined? Like, is it a chapter lead to chapter member type thing? It is not. It's almost never one-on-one. Like we will have a management discussion about it. So it's more sophisticated than just a one-on-one. Like you would never. I don't think you would ever be concerned that like one person determines that. We just don't operate that way. Same thing. The question was about hiring and firing, how that plays out. Again, it's more management team. So which I don't show here. So this is partly why I'm saying the model that I put up there is just to highlight different to show that leadership is multifaceted, that it's not this kind of shallow word you throw out there, that there's all these different facets. I haven't even covered the one that you just described there, because we do have a management team structure. Like, is that product tech management? No, it's this other thing, which is this general organizational, you could call it people management, I guess, at a different level, but I might even put a different thing through there. There's another facet there. So anything like this hiring, firing, reviews and stuff, that is almost always going through a more of a team type thing. It's never a one person makes the call thing. We don't operate that way.
Have you ever experimented with teams doing their own hiring and firing and doing their own compensation?
Within Spotify, no. I'm not sure. That's interesting. I'm not sure we're there yet, but we'll see. Yeah, I think the bigger problem. Actually, the question was like, would Spotify, like, have we tried team hiring, firing, team compensation type stuff, no, we have not. It's something that I'm not dealing with that problem yet, but it'll come up soon. I do want to say, what did I want to say here? Actually, no, well, let's go to the next question.
Are agile coaches part of a squad? And if so, what's their involvement in the product delivery process?
So question was, is Agile Coach part of a squad? And answer is not really. So Agile coaches tend to be associated with, let's say nominally, again, ideally 2 to 3 squads. Practically, probably, like right now, I'm probably associated with 4, 5. When I started, it was like 50 to 1 until we hired more people. By the way, we are hiring. Come up to me later. But yeah, there is a particular dynamic here. You are, again, this is sort of why we got, hey, this isn't, like we're not Scrum Masters, like we're not filling this kind of tech owner type thing. We're kind of looking at a different level. You're looking at like how this overall thing is working. Again, kind of interesting here because the matrix I have, I'm not even talking about the kind of stuff that you might say, hey, is a coach doing a kind of direction, leadership, management for some other facet? And sort of, yes, right? Because you're looking at how does this overall system work? As well as you're stepping into some stuff. You're helping out with some of the people stuff. You're helping out with some of the product stuff. You're helping up sometimes with some of the technology stuff if you have that background. But you're looking at some other facet as well. Because at least within Spotify, the coach is also part of that leadership team, and they're engaging in leadership type of activities. But again, a different facet of it, which I haven't talked too much about. It's probably a little complicated, and just this part is, I think, important enough. Yes?
What's the difference between a chapter and a squad?
Difference between a chapter and a squad is let's call it a delivery team. A chapter is more like a function. So Spotify is a matrixed organization. So I have delivery, there's a delivery axis, and there's also like a capability function axis. If that makes sense? Is everyone familiar with what a matrix organization is? Like, not the crap matrix organizations that are all out there, but like just the fundamental concept is that you have different aspects of concern that will necessarily conflict, and you're creating a structure to force that necessary conflict so you deal with it. Right? So there is necessary conflict between the needs of someone trying to develop a capability versus us trying to deliver stuff. You need to highlight that because you can't avoid it. It's better to make that very explicit so you can deal with that. Okay, there's even more. It's not like two-dimensional matrix is also like reality is even more complicated than that, but that's a basic one. Any other questions? Because I actually have more slides. Okay, yes?
Referring to the ThoughtWorks product delivery model, you mentioned that the client owns the product direction, and in a lot of times it can be wrong.
Not a lot of times. It can be wrong.
And to make matters worse, it can be wrong with waterfall methodology. So at ThoughtWorks, how did you deal with that situation?
So the question is, given the product direction from a client could be incorrect some of the time, how would you deal with that? Now, one of the advantages of an agile approach, especially specifically a iterative incremental release approach, is that you can detect, if you set it up correctly, you can detect the error. Because you'll try something, if you're paying attention, you'll notice it doesn't achieve an outcome, therefore that can correct a bad product direction. Now I would say that's like not an ideal thing. The ideal thing is to do things so you don't do dumb stuff like that, but hey, better than delivering the entire thing and being wrong, because that's a very expensive coming back around. That's pretty much it. Like if you can't convince the client that their direction is incorrect, you can contain the damage by releasing like a smaller release and show the bad direction, or you can refuse the contract. We've actually done, I don't know if you've experienced it, we did that a lot back in the day. We just say, nope, see you later. Call me back in about a year when you've tried to deliver this, and we'll have a talk. I've actually had that, I'm not even joking, I've had that talk multiple times, where it was like, hey, last year we talked, and oh, how did that go? Oh, it tanked. Yeah, no kidding, and let's talk. Like, you have those things. So it's a weird game with consulting. Like, sometimes you don't, you have to make a call. Like, if, hey, the economy is bad, maybe I still take that assignment, I grin and bear it. But if the economy is fine, I have more than one client, then yeah, I'm going to say, see you later, I'll call you back. Or you'll call me back in a year. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, it's like what consulting sometimes brings out my cynical side. Funny. Any other questions? Okay, so again, I just want to, again, if you look at this, and I kind of tried to bold the emphasis at Spotify here. And again, it's simplified in order to demonstrate something. Because we are so keen on autonomy, we've tended to not be that good at anything related to management. That is the coordination of people and resources. It is not designed for. Everything was designed to be autonomous, decoupled. So once you had to talk about coordination, nothing is designed for that. We are changing that because, heck, it's getting big and complicated. And also even the different product concerns are getting more complicated. But like, let's say classically this is the case. The other things tend to be pretty tight, especially the people thing. There's a lot, like a significant emphasis on that. It was very surprising for me because, again, I'm very used to self-sufficiency, so just all the effort there I found kind of odd. And also this big focus on product delivery. I'm only, again, I don't think I mentioned this, I'm only emphasizing or describing Spotify from a product delivery perspective. I'm not talking about non-product delivery, which is like business operational stuff. I'm not concerned with that. I'm just talking about this. If we look at those things, then again, we're looking at different facets again. There's still, again, those areas would still look at direction. They would still look at leadership. They'd still look at management, but it would be different facets. Okay? So this is the question, and why I talk about this, why I kind of introduce this matrix, because I think it might be interesting for you to look at your company, your organization, and say, what do you emphasize? And it's not, again, not necessarily right or wrong. It's more like what problems you're solving, but you can, hey, like what do we emphasize? Where do we have the strengths? Like we're really good at product direction, we're really good at technology leadership or whatever. Where are we weak? Whereas like there's nothing covering this, or people are kind of getting by with this. Like what is that gap? And I think that kind of discussion, as from before, we get a more sophisticated discussion about leadership, like leadership, when we throw that there. We're talking about more interesting facets. It's not oversimplified. There's a lot of different things to look at. You're considering different things. It's a much richer discussion. Okay? And if you look at it, this, again, you may not use those, at least the columns, the same way, but maybe you can use the rows and work out what the equivalent columns need to be. Okay, that's it. That's a little bit, so just in case you don't know who I am, I don't like talking about myself until I'm done. I first encountered extreme programming in about '99. Started out doing build master stuff, development, ended up being a principal consultant, mainly based in ThoughtWorks Australia, joined Spotify in February 2015. Those are all my social media stuff, if you want to learn more about what I'm about. Otherwise, any final questions? Yes?
You say Spotify is very sort of focused on autonomous teams, that sort of thing. Are you finding that you bring a little bit more structure around things because you're scaling and you're trying to grow? Like your creation of a tech role or technology?
So the question was what, because Spotify emphasizes autonomy, are we finding that we're putting different structures in order to deal with scaling? The simple answer is yes, simply because, and I would say, independent of whatever you say we emphasize, scaling requires new structure. Like it's just the sheer size of things means you have to add new stuff no matter what you emphasize. That's what I would say. The reason why I say that is because I would say we're not necessarily, and when we even say autonomy, I might not even say emphasizing autonomy of teams. There's even emphasizing the autonomy of individuals as well as teams and so on and so on. Like, it's just like a general value statement type thing. Now, in order to support, like systemically, reliably support that sense of autonomy at a very large scale, when you have like more and more and more people, to some extent, like that's where a lot of the structure stuff is there to do. Like it's there so that you can still have that feeling of freedom to act, even though like it just gets more complicated. Like I might even frame the introduction of a technical owner isn't there to say, hey, I'm going to undermine autonomy. It's more that, okay, this allows teams to maintain that sense of they can cover it themselves because they have enough coordination that like someone else doesn't have to get involved, right? So they're still like operating well. What interestingly enough, at least for some of the teams I've been coaching, we were talking about our gaps in coordination before other people said, hey, we should look at this technical, and we're saying, well, of course, that's the problem. We already saw it. It just kind of lined up with whatever we were dealing with. But just because we talk about it doesn't mean like you still might have to look at it like organization-wide that, oh, there's a pattern here. So that's what we talk about, this kind of like introducing a role. Okay? Any other questions? Cool, that's it then. If you have anything else, feel free to grab me.